Hey, what's up, ladies and gentlemen? It's Chris from Togger Canada. Today we're going to ask the question, should I buy a used camera? Now, there's so many new models coming out all the time now from all the different camera brands, which means that there are a lot of used cameras on the market as well. Now, technology is going at such a fast pace that a lot of the used cameras and older models are actually still really good. I mean, personally, I'm a Canon user and I still love my 5D3. We actually had 5 of them at the studio and we've sold 3 of them now, so I still have a couple kicking around. But when you're shopping for a used DSLR, what are the things that you should really be looking for? Sometimes on the surface, the condition looks great, but has it really been through the ringer? So here are a few quick tips on what to look for when you are purchasing a camera. So the first thing is shutter count. The shutter of the camera is kind of like the engine of a car. So when you're buying a used car, the first question you usually ask is, what's the mileage on it? How many kilometers, or how many miles, depending on where you are, is on the car? And from there, you kind of make a base judgment on how used the car is. So when shopping for a used camera, it's very similar. The first question is, what's the shutter count on the camera? And can the seller prove what the actual shutter count is? Because on a lot of the higher end Canons, I'd say the semi-professional line upwards, you would need a special software to determine what's the current shutter count and how much mileage is on the mirror of the camera. You also want to be able to check whether it's the first or the original shutter on the camera, or has it been replaced as well. So having a shutter replaced is kind of like having a rebuilt engine on the car. It's pretty much new, but everything else on it is still original, right? So when looking at my old 5D3 here, what are some of the other questions that we want to ask? One good practice is to actually do an online search or look up the owner's manual for that particular model and for that brand, and to see what the average shutter life is expected for that camera. Now, take my old 5D3 here for example. I've had 5 of these now for our studio, and we've had some last 450,000 clicks before we had to replace the shutter. So that's way beyond the manufacturer's recommendation. You know, it's 150,000, I believe, for the 5D3, but definitely has lasted well past that. There are no problems with the images past 150,000. Sometimes I think it's just how you take care of the camera. Like if it's on rapid fire all the time, I think the shutter would probably last a lot less than if you're a photographer that takes your time and doesn't, take rapid fire shots all the time. Like if you use it for sports or, fast moving wildlife, for example. But shutter count is not the only thing that we're going to look at, because if it has a low shutter count, so what? How has the camera been used? Is it a photographer that perhaps used it in very extreme weathers? So, somebody that travels to the Antarctic every couple of months, and the camera's been beaten down by snow, by rain, it's been dropped in slush, and so on and so forth, right? Now, hopefully that isn't the case for the one that you're looking at right now, but you gotta think of it this way, that it is a possibility. If it has a high shutter count, well, maybe it was used by an event photographer like myself, and you take a lot of pictures at events and weddings, so that could be the case as well. You also have to look at the wear on the buttons and the dials on the camera, so always test it out thoroughly when you're planning to spend a few hundred to a few thousand on a used camera, and have the seller agree to meet you somewhere, and bring your own lens, bring a battery if you have it, bring your own memory card, and test it out thoroughly. Make sure that pictures are sharp, there's no banding on the images. Banding can sometimes be a result of a shutter that's near its end of life. You want to look for dead pixels as well. So look for those weird little red, green, just that colored dot on the image that appears on every single image. If you get one of those, then that means there's a dead pixel on the sensor. and hence you might have to replace the sensor. Now typically it costs about a couple of hundred to a few hundred to replace a shutter on a DSLR. I know we've done it a few times. That costs around $350 for sort of like the 5D3, 5D4 line. May cost more, may cost a little bit less, you know, depending on whether you are a CPS member, for example, the Canon Professional Services. But back to buttons and dials. So you want to make sure that they all are nice and bouncy still, and they're reactive. Just put yourself in a 2-minute scenario where you have to take a few quick pictures, use the dials, make sure that everything is working just fine. Now, it's not just all on you to investigate, right? Sometimes the easiest way is to ask the seller. You may get a really honest seller, like I would be, and tell you exactly what the camera's been through. If there are any problems with it, what the problem is, then that way, you know, if you have an honest seller and you just have a small problem on the camera, maybe it's pretty cost effective to repair it still and get a new one. So another tip is, if you're buying a camera that's over a year to a couple of years old or older, then you have to think that the battery has been well used already. So you're probably gonna have to buy a replacement battery for the camera to function, you know, as if it was brand new. Batteries only last for so long. For some camera brands, there's actually a date of manufacture on the battery itself, so take a look there too. Again, just inspect, you know, every part of the camera. And also, depending on the brand, you can look up the serial number of the camera also, and just do a quick online search on if the serial number is XYZ, when was it probably manufactured. That gives you an idea of how old the camera is. So you can use these tips and kind of look at the condition of the camera, and then you can ask the seller, so you know, it's the same questions, even though you kind of know what the answer is, and just see if it all lines up. Then that way, you know, if the seller is not being totally upfront with how the camera is, then that'll give you a better feeling of whether to purchase it or not. All right, a couple other things you might want to look at. You know, does the seller still have like the original box and everything? Does it just look well taken care of? Somebody just get a good idea. You know, are there scratches on the screen? Are there scratches on the top screen? And then, you know, take a quick peek inside the camera as well, just to take a look at the condition of the mirror, for example, or the sensor. Make sure there are no scratches, or, you know, there's not a lot of dust in it. But otherwise, back to the question, should I buy a used camera? The answer is maybe. There are some really good condition ones out there for sure, but you really need to know what you're looking for. And if you're buying one from a studio like mine, then you probably want to do a little bit more research and make sure that the camera is in good condition, because it might have been used a lot. And not everyone's going to be honest like me. You know, if there's a problem with the camera, I'm going to tell you what it is. I'm going to give you the exact shutter count on it, and I like to give, if I'm selling a used camera, which I have sold a few in the past year, I always like to provide a printout of the shutter count from the software that I use. Usually it costs like $5 or $6 to do a quick shutter count check on Canon cameras. And let's talk about price also. How much should you be paying for that particular model that you're looking at? Well, you're gonna have to do some research and see what the average price is. So always look at the lowest price to the highest price, and then what's the more popular price range for that model on the used market. Don't just take a look at one source. So if you're looking at just eBay, you're gonna get a huge range. And that's just an example, because depending on where in the world it is, sometimes that brand is more available in certain parts of the world versus others. But you should also take a look locally, like on Craigslist, or on like a social media marketplace, like on Facebook, and see how much on average it's selling for. You know, you could kick the tires a bit too, and just message sellers and see what's the lowest price that they'll go to. Then that way you can determine what's the best price for you and your budget. All right, so after all that is said and done, just please make sure to test out the camera before you agree to purchase it. You know, I've been totally upfront with my used gear that I've sold in the past year, but I've met up with some buyers who literally just asked me like, the camera's still good, right? I said, yeah. And I said, okay. And then they handed me the money. But, you know, I don't want to sell anything that's not working, of course, but I also want them to see that it's fully functioning and totally fine. So I actually do tell the buyer at that point, like, I think you should test it out. You shouldn't be buying a used camera for this much without testing it out first. That's just me. I hope these tips are helpful for you, whether you're an amateur or a pro looking in the used market. Make sure to look at these things. If you like this video, make sure you subscribe, hit like. Look forward to talking to you in the near future. Stay safe. Laters.